Hi.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Conversations in Pop Culture. I have with me SK Malvo.
Yes, yes, you
I
got it
think I
right.
think I said it right. It's tricky. It's spelled a certain way, and I think I said it right. So, but anyhow, for those who don't know, you are the writer and the co-creator on a comic called The Music Maker, which I think is so interesting. And we're going to talk about it. But a lot of people probably haven't
Thank
heard
you.
of it who are watching this slash listening to this. So, what is the basic premise of the comic? I think that's the best place how to start and where to start.
Well, I mean, first thing we do have to start with is that it is a fairly mature comic. It deals with a lot of risque subject matter. It deals with sex, drugs, rock and roll,
17
like the
and
name.
up. Let's start there.
17 up, yeah, yeah. We'll go 17 and up. If you're 17 and you still don't know about these sort of things, there's something wrong with you. But um, but so it's a mature comic, but it's also about this guy. His name is Maestro, and he has the ability to just through sheer intellect. He knows how to manipulate music and sound to hypnotize and manipulate people. And he originally uses this kind of gift for self gain, and then he's given the opportunity to use it to help other people and get himself out of a lot of tricky situations. And that's where the story starts initially.
And to even go further, what was the inspiration for this comic? Because there's a lot
I
of comics about music, there's a lot of comics that's sort of about the music industry that have music as sort of the backlay, but nothing really deals with them in this fashion.
Well, one thing that we do that's it's it's not completely unheard of, but it is something that we lean upon more than any other comic, and that's we have QR codes within the story, and you can scan those and listen to music and sounds that's actually happening in the story while you're reading the story. So we call ourselves Music Maker, and it is a music-based comic, but we are one of the few ones that's actually using music and sound and bringing that to a soundless medium. And we're bringing and something that's again, we're not the first people to do it. The first people to do it actually were a comic called Bee and Puppy Cat. And as you might have guessed, we are not Bee and Puppy Cat. We're a bit darker than that. So, but yeah, we're completely based around music and sound, and we're going to have various musical acts that are going to be within each issue, and it's going to be fun to see who turns up in each issue and what their part is in the overall plot.
And to even talk about that, so who you've had in your comic so far is Society of the Silver Cross, Drop the Act,
Yes,
and I think
yes,
Jenny Darwin or Darwin is either
Darren.
coming
Yeah,
or has been in it because I didn't see it, and I might have missed that one when I read the first two
no,
issues.
she's going to be in issue 3, and she's been absolutely fantastic to work with and been very understanding. And most people who know of her from Britain's Got Talent, but she was also one of the original people who sang Heartbreaker. And yeah, and she's just an amazing vocalist, and to actually have her not only lend her voice to the comic, but she's also actually going to be in the comic in issue 3. It's going to be really wild, and it's going to be really fun to see like what part she plays in it. So yeah.
So to talk a little bit about that, because I think this is fascinating. I really do. I think it's very interesting when other mediums come into comics. Earlier this week, I had Shotgun Samurai on, and they made a movie off of their comic, and it
Yeah.
linked into their comic. And that interview you could watch. Really interesting interview for everybody who wants to know their position on what they did. But what is this like for you to have music interjected and have your comic transcend the comic medium?
Well, we're definitely bringing in people to both sides of the coin who normally wouldn't. We've got comic people who aren't necessarily. Well, I don't know anyone who's not really fanatical about music these days, but um, but you've got people who are getting different music that they normally wouldn't listen to who read our comics, and then you have people who are big fans of these musical acts learning about our comic and getting interested because they see that, oh hey, look, it's Drop the Act, and oh hey, look, it's Jane Darren, and and they get to hear like this really incredible music, but at the same time it's interwoven into the story. So yeah, I mean, and I'm not going to pretend that what it has become was what we were expecting. Like, it's gone way beyond what we expected we could do with this. But yeah, it's yeah, the initial idea was just music based. Can we even pull this off? And then once we figured out we could, it's like, okay, well, let's see if we can do this a couple more times.
And also, and the way I view it is that by bringing in these music acts, and these, not to disparage them or disparage anybody here, but these aren't the biggest names, but in many ways they're growing, and they are growing their fan
Yeah,
base, and it adds an element of legitimacy to what you're doing. And I think that's so fascinating because in many ways it's a selling point. It also makes you and your comic real, and it kind of makes you a little bit of a big player. So what is that
it,
like?
it
Very interesting to do that. And it's a cool marketing
it's
ploy too.
I mean, we honestly weren't thinking it in that regard. I mean, it definitely is. You hit the nail on the head with that. But yeah, honestly, honestly, it was just it started out with me, just me. Before I brought in our illustrator Andres Casada, the Q method. He's the one who we attribute the really sick artwork to. But yeah, it started out with me and just this idea of like, well, wonder if I could do that. Wonder if I could, wouldn't it be cool if I could get, this musical act that I think is really cool, or this musical act that I think is really cool, and get them to like be in, so you want to be in a comic, kind of like, just, my way of cozying up to these people who I think are really fantastic and really talented. And yeah, that does give us a certain level of legitimacy, but it also is bringing in um, a whole new batch of fans that they didn't necessarily have before. And so it's like this, it's kind of like a symbiotic relationship in a way, and it's really cool and really fascinating the way it works.
And so we kind of touched upon the music element, and people might be confused now because they're saying, "Great, music's in here," but now I want to talk about the story so that people understand that side of the coin also. And
Yeah, my contribution, it would be nice.
and so I think it's really interesting, and the music does fit when you're listening to it. It's very cool. It's a cool experience to read a comic and actually hear the sounds because a lot of the scenes that have the QR code in them don't really have much dialogue. And so it's
Yeah,
very interesting and it's very nice. And it's only a few panels. And obviously, this song far exceeds the space it's supposed to be played in. Clearly, it's meant to though. But I
yeah,
digress because I want to dive into a little bit of the story so that we give people a taste so that they go out and buy it. And so I just think it's so fascinating and the main character in particular, just to give an idea, and you could jump in any time. He has
okay.
an IQ of over 160. He's kind of a little bit of a punk, selfish. He's got a drug habit. He's
Yeah.
definitely a criminal. There's no doubt about that. The story starts out, and I'm about to ruin something. Starts out with him in a prison, and then it kind of goes back and forward, and then backwards again.
Yeah.
I think a lot of his problems come from the fact that his sister is dead because it's up in the air. It's up in the air for a few reasons, and I haven't read issue three. I don't think issue three's out yet, so I don't know fully.
Not yet.
But probably some of that comes from that, and then on top of that, he just happened to invent a machine when he was sort of failing high school that manipulates music and hypnotic ish, if we will. So, what
Yeah.
was that
And he's
entire
like,
like of creating this character? Because it's really interesting, all the different elements that are at play. And obviously, we're joking a little bit when I'm speaking about this, but it really is an interesting character. And then he happens to get looped into tracking down a serial killer that is targeting children on top of all
yeah.
this. So, what was that like to create this character and create the story? Because it really is, he's really the centerpiece in many ways.
Yeah. I mean, and that's going to be like the first 5 issues is going to be just about him and, his progression and where his character actually goes. It's going to be, because he is such a big character, it's going to be encompassing his whole backstory, or at least the majority of it. And you can tell just by looking at it that I'm a big Iron Man fan. You can tell, like, straight off yeah, it's obvious. Like, he's got like an IQ of like 160. He's completely narcissistic. He's got a drug problem. It's like, okay, yeah, he's a skirt chasing drug addict who's a genius and everything. It's like, okay, there's a guy I can relate to. Yeah, totally. But no, like, I started out like, he actually started out as a character who was going to be in a novel, and then a little more I like paid attention, I was like, wow, I've always loved comics. This would be really so much more interesting as a visual medium. This would be interesting as a visual medium. Then, like, later on, further down the line, I swear I will get away from the music at some point, but yeah, it was interesting because once I said, okay, well, I need to have someone illustrate this, and then I found Andres, and yeah, once it happened, everything, it's like it was like this beautiful culmination of things that just kind of fell into place. And later on, you're going to find out, after the initial 5, if we still keep going with this, that I'm also a big Hellblazer fan. That, I loved Constantine and everything. I love jaded heroes. I don't know what it is, but I think there's so much more. Yeah, I don't know. They're just so much more interesting, and I don't know if necessarily relatable, because I don't know how many people are addicted to drugs who are reading this. But I'm just saying, finding characters that have relatable flaws is always what makes a more interesting hero in my personal philosophy.
And we see this in the first 2 issues, and really in issue 2 more. He kind of gets brought back to the U.S. from sitting in a Thailand prison and pretty much spending his entire life there. And second, before he has to get to work, he's like running to a party with an ankle monitor on. So it's kind of funny, and then he's also talking out of his ass a little bit, which is also funny to some degree.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting to see this type of character, and we get an idea of why he is the way he is. But at the end of issue 2, and we kind of get a real introduction to the Green Man, which is, yes, the foil, and I think it's the antagonist, I think is the proper term here. And so,
who really puts him in place as the hero, and the only thing, honestly, that puts him in place as a hero, because up until that point, he's so narcissistic and so conceited, and so, he could easily have been a villain,
And to even talk about that, so we don't know much about the Green Man up to this point. We just know that the Green Man is using the technology that Maestro invented and is using it to kill. So I kind of want to backtrack and talk a little bit about that, because this technology is really interesting, and this idea, especially because we're right now doing something that I guess is podcast-esque. It's somewhat musical-esque to some degree. It's sort of done through an MP4, MP3 type style, and we're using technology that the music industry has embraced to some degree. And then also, I would imagine that Napster and iTunes and Zoom all came into play with the development of this technology. So how did that come about? Because that's really interesting. Just the thought of having music and different tones influencing. I mean, I was just watching a documentary about Elizabeth Holmes and her entire voice.
Yeah.
And how she speaks very low, like this, and it's very persuasive, and there's a whole psychology element to the fact that she's speaking when her voice is like, here, up here, and she's speaking like this in board meetings. So I'm just curious where that idea came from.
Well, the idea, I mean, it's very much basic form, it's like, okay, everyone can relate to having a song stuck in their head, regardless of whether it's good or bad. It's stuck in there, and you can't get it out until it's ready to leave. Everyone can relate to that. And so it was kind of taking that concept and just, you know, kicking it up with steroids, essentially. It was this concept that, how, certain senses, like certain smells, can take us back to certain memories. Certain sounds can take us back to certain memories as well, and they also can kind of influence how we perceive the world. And it's funny that you mention, how, and this is, I've noticed it's actually kind of a recurring thing with voice actresses, not actors, but actresses. A lot of them who have mastery over their voice, um,
Speak
they speak a
artificially
lot
lower.
lower.
Speak artificially
Yes,
lower.
yeah, they do, and it's one of those things that it's one of those things that I don't. It's they didn't have a consensus about this and said, hey, we're all going to talk down here now. It wasn't like something that happened like that. But yeah, I've noticed that people, women especially, who have that kind of control over their voice, do choose to speak at a lower register, and I've always found that kind of interesting that you picked up on that first of all, but also that is going along with what we were like talking about. Yeah. So, and also to call back to like about six exits back whenever you mentioned about the Green Man and the gravitas where he's killing kids. There will be a. We didn't just put that in because it's yeah, hey, child murder, yeah, because that's what bad people do. No, we didn't. We didn't. We weren't kind of as flip about that, but it had to be the stakes had to be exactly at that level or higher to get Maestro out of his funk, to get him out of his conceit. It had to be something that it was and it had to be so tied to him that there was no way that he could ignore it. And so you're going to find that out in 3 and 4, especially. But yeah, there was definitely method to the madness. Like we weren't just like making it as horrible as we possibly could just to be dark for dark's sake. But no, we definitely there was definitely intent with why we did that.
And to talk about that, what's interesting is that with this technology, this is almost the silent killer without the
Mhm.
silent killing. It's killing with loud music, but being undetected.
Yeah.
So it's the same
Yeah.
effect as being a silent killer, just very open and out in public. And I thought that was a nice touch in this comic because we don't really see the Green Man killing anybody until it's played back for Maestro, and then we see two panels, and one is they're the exact same panel except one has the Green Man killing somebody and the other one doesn't. And the music's sort of
Yeah.
playing, and it's really interesting to get that. So, what was that like? Because that's interesting in its own right, because it's very much the exact opposite of a silent.
There is there is a video online, and this actually deals with perception, not necessarily audio perception, but perception. And I'm not going to give it away because this will ruin the video and it'll completely defeat why people should be going to see it. But anyhow, it's about a basketball, and you have to watch where the basketball is moving. And you might have seen this. There's a lot of people. I mean, it's been around for a while, but there's another element to the video that goes completely unnoticed until it's brought to your attention. Until it's like, but did you notice? And then you watch the exact same thing over again, and it's like, what? What? How did I not? And that's kind of like it's almost a Houdini kind of moment. It's like, yeah, technically you're not being hidden from anything, but your perception is being very much guided elsewhere and everything while something else is going on. And I saw that in a psychology class in college, and I was like, and everyone, and you could hear across like all the people who hadn't heard it, who hadn't seen it, and everything. Everyone's like, what? Oh my, no, no!" And it was like it was funny. And then all the people who had were like, yeah, whatever, because you can't go back after that. Once you see it, it's there, and it's so funny because yeah, a lot of that came into play about well, what if it were like with sound? It's like you're so fixated on some kind of sound or some kind of visual that's cued off by the sound that you completely miss something that should be obvious. And so that's where that came into play.
There's a great meme that I put up about a year ago on my Facebook page, and it's a picture of a face of a Gundam. And so underneath it, it says, "What did you notice first? That the Gundam face, the Gundam is made up of human bodies, or that there's a naked woman right next to the Gundam?" And 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 and,
That's
and
the terrible part.
like there's on one of the sides of like the Gundam's face, there's pretty much a naked woman on it, and it's an amazing meme. And talk about perception. The reason why I bring it up is because it's funny, and I thought it was one of the funniest things because it proves the point. But it's the idea that when you look at it, if you didn't see the caption below, you wouldn't notice
You would
any
have
of it.
no clue.
It was
Yeah,
just some
yeah.
people would have figured it out because it's not what you're looking at. It's not what you think.
Mhm.
And so I think that is so interesting where there's a lot of stuff going on. I think that entire thing about perception and obviously, I mean, we only witnessed the little thing with the Green Man briefly. So it's not like we're hiding the wool, or you're not at least hiding the wool over our eyes
No.
per se with this. And so I just want to make that clear in case anybody's like, "Oh my God, it's a perception comic." I don't want anybody to think that, but I do think that's fascinating that we do have that in play to some degree. And so, does this comic go further down that pathway? Just curiosity for issues 3 and 4.
The ultimate 3, 4, and 5 actually. By the time we hit 5, it's going to be like you are going to have a moment of, oh, what? Wait, but what? No, you're going to have that moment. You're going to have that moment. I can give away that and not feel like I'm spoiling anything. But yeah, like that is like that was what the whole premise behind. I mean, obviously having this, narcissistic, very anti-heroic hero was about. But also, you know, judging books by their cover, I guess, could be like the secondary character if we wanted to say anything about the comic as a whole. Is that, what you are seeing is not giving you the whole story. You do have to actually, dig in a little bit, and then it's like once it almost. I realize I'm ruining this movie for like maybe 3 people, but it has a Fight Club kind of quality to it. In that, like once you watch,
When you realize that Brad Pitt is Edward Norton, it changes everything.
Yeah,
Once you realize
everything, yeah. Which we don't do that. I will say that we don't do that, but
because
yeah,
the Green Man can't be Maestro.
No,
At least not right now, and I don't think that's much of a secret. And we find that out pretty early on in issue 2 without ruining too much. That's not a secret, in which that clearly those two are gonna be at it, but everybody else technically is in play at this, including his very dead sister, which is how you described. Right in the opening, when you got the character portraits, the very deceased, I think you said it, very dead, something like that.
Yeah. Or his very talented, very deceased sister. Yeah, is the way I think I put it.
And the reason why I bring this up is because that character is in play throughout this entire book. Despite the character being dead, she's in play. And
very much so.
And I think that's where I'm going to leave that position, because that'll get people thinking. Because it's always interesting, and I'm a skeptic. When I read things, I put on my detective hat whenever I put something on, and let's just say there's a lot of people in play in this.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's going to be kind of the fun thing about it, is that it is, in a sense, it's a bit of a chess game, in a sense, that we're not quite sure. It's a chess game like playing chess blindfolded. Like, you get kind of a rough gist of like what's moving where and what needs to move where, but you have no clue, honestly, what is actually supposed to go where. So, I mean, yeah. So, yeah.
We're going to table that right there. But I want to talk about something else beyond this comic that's related to it, because COVID-19 has legitimately torpedoed the entire entertainment sector. Everything across the board, music, concerts, cons, I mean, if you don't know that San
Cons
Diego Comic
especially,
Con has
yeah.
been canceled, you've been living under a rock. Just saying, just saying. That's the big one. That's the big one here. So, having said all that, I am curious because I don't know if you go to cons. I don't know if you promote the Music Maker at conventions, and I don't even know how it has affected you printing the book because I know that a lot of independent comic creators are having problems with that right now, and things are starting to get back to normal. So I'm curious how you've been affected.
Well, I mean, I work with a collective of other comic book, indie comic book writers and artists and what have you, and creators. Um, and yeah, it's impossible to say that it hasn't affected it because it really has, especially on the indie level. Because what we mainly do is that it's just us, excuse the term, but BSing with fans is what how we usually make our bread and butter, at least as far as getting the comic out there. None of it, there's no money to be made in indie comics. Let me just point that out right now before anyone even thinks for a second.
Very few people can.
Very few. I mean, it happens, it does happen, but
I know people
few
who
and
have
far
done it,
between.
but they haven't done it because they were in indie comics. They just had a big enough following before indie comics. And then
Exactly, exactly.
every once in a while, somebody gets lucky, and but it takes them 10 years to do it.
Exactly. And you do, and that's perfectly fine, honestly, because you do it because you love the medium, you do it because you love the art form. You do it because you love connecting with fans in that way. And you love, hearing someone who says, "Oh man, I love when this and that happened," and that's the whole reason we're doing it. We're not doing it for the money. We're doing it for, like, we wanted that relatability. And so whenever we don't have that with cons, it's I mean, luckily, I'm one of the few people who can say that this was. Oh, I mean, it's a awful tragedy. Obviously, COVID is, there's no way of describing it any other way. But um, the fact that it's happened in the 21st century is has been kind of has been, I'm going to say, a lucky break for humanity. Even though it has been devastating, we can still communicate with each other and communicate with each other even on a
Fast enough.
visual
Fast
sense.
enough.
Yeah, yeah. Like, I mean, we can still, like, you don't have to, like, send a, like, a wire to somebody. You don't have to, like, send a telegram or a letter or something like that to get a hold and get in touch with somebody. You can actually see them face to face to a certain extent. So I mean, that aspect has been very helpful for indie comic book creators in particular, because we can still connect with fans. We can still connect with fans on, like, Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, what have you. And so we're not quite as quite as affected as I think we would have been in other circumstances. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So even jumping off of that, because clearly it's affected everybody, and it just hasn't affected the indies. It's affected the big guys too, in
Yeah,
many
yeah,
ways.
Diamond especially.
So I mean, Diamond is shut down. I think they're looking at June, early July of reopening now,
Mhm.
from my
Yeah.
understanding. And I think a few comics are coming out next week, but very few, very few. I think maybe like 20 books out of the 1,800 that are published every month
Yeah,
through Diamond,
exactly.
might I add, through Diamond. And the indies are a different discussion completely. But I'm curious because I don't know how many cons you go to, but how do you think the con scene is going to change, both on a safety level and even on a business level? Because I would imagine that there's going to be issues with people feeling comfortable from both the fan side and the business side.
Yeah, yeah, and that is something. There's a.
No feet
I
to the
based that.
fire, might I add. No feet to the fire. So if you're wrong, no
What?
penalty.
My toesies. Um. No. 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 No worries there. Honestly, like, yeah, it's going to affect it, and being in the comic book industry, no matter who you were, whether it was indie, whether you were an artist, whether you were a writer, whether you were a comic book store, you did it because you loved it. You didn't go into it assuming you were going to make billions of dollars. Like, unless there for every Stan Lee, there's about 6 or 7,000 me's, I guess, is the way I'm gonna put it. Um, but yeah, like, and even he had to start like down on the edge of the totem pole. So yeah, I try not to like focus on the negative, but I mean, the sad truth of the matter is that there are certain like cons, there are certain comic book stores, there are certain artists who just aren't going to come back from this, and you kind of know that going into it. It's unfortunate, but I mean, the thing that I can like argue most about is that if you are a fan of something that is, regardless of whether it's indie or mainstream, whatever your preference tends to be, support it as best as you can. Just support it as, talk it up as much as best you can. Just keep it alive for as long as you can, and just because it's everything about the comic book scene is about passion. It's about passion, not money. And so, and when things like this happen, you struggle through it as best you can.
And speaking about
Sorry, that
that,
was a bummer.
and speaking about that, I think I should give you an opportunity to promote yourself. So, where can people find the Music Maker? Where can people buy the book? Where can people support on social media? What social media do you have? And what other ways can people personally follow you? Because that helps in many ways, as well as any other support needed. Here's your opportunity.
Well, there's this really funny video on YouTube that has it's the action figures of the Green Lantern and Deadpool, and it was whenever Ryan Reynolds was picking between the two parts, and he says, "Well, I'm wearing my 100% cotton, available in all sizes, Team Wade T-shirt." We don't have that yet, but we're working on it. Um, it's going to say Team Wade. Anyway, no, you can go to musicmakercomics.com, and you can go to yeah, I've got a Twitter page, Music Maker Comics, comics with an X across all mediums. And we've got our Facebook page as well. And through musicmakercomics.com, you can get actual tangible copies of the comics, and you can get issue one completely free. You just have to subscribe to the newsletter, and then you're all set.
Well, we're going to stop there because I think we covered everything. But before we go, I want to make it a point that support now is not just economics. If you have the extra money during this time, definitely go throw it at your favorite indie people. Definitely go support the Music Maker. If you can afford it, I think it's a great read. You can get issue one for free, so you can try it for free. And then if you like it, go buy issue two. If you don't like
Right
it,
on.
I don't think anybody's going to force you to buy issue two if you don't like it. But do look for those QR codes if you are. Be on the lookout for that because sometimes some people miss it. And I'm going to say that, but also in a more serious note, if you can't afford it and you love issue one of the best things that you can do
Rave about it.
right now is follow on Twitter, like the Facebook page, shoot a tweet out about it, retweet a position on it, retweet, when you put something up on the page, retweet it because it helps a lot because it shares it with all the people like the Facebook page, like a post on the Facebook page, share a post on the Facebook page because unless you have no power internet, you have no excuse not to support something, especially if you like the first issue. So that's where we're going to leave it because support now is not just economics, and there's no excuse anymore in the 21st century, minus not having internet or electricity.
Right on.